What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and learn about the English Civil Wars. Civil Wars? I didn't know England had had a civil war, let alone several civil wars. I had absolutely no clue about that. I first heard this in a different reaction watching the history of the British Empire, and I was like, wait, what? England has had civil wars? That sounds horrible and fascinating, you know, as the way a lot of things in history are, sadly. But America, can really relate because one of the most pivotal points in America, as every American knows, and it's drilled into our education at a very young age, the American Civil War, the northern states versus the southern states, the Union versus the Confederacy over the abolition of slavery. Some wanted it, some wanted to get rid of it. Abraham Lincoln was involved, and all sorts of madness happened. Now, that I understand the reasoning behind the American Civil War, but I have no clue why England would have a civil war, let alone many civil wars. So, finding out that intention, that reason behind the civil wars is just like one of the most interesting things I think I'm going to get out of learning this. And another thing is I was thinking about America is still kind of has parts of it that are influenced to this day, by the American Civil War. People remember it. People who lived in the North and South refer to the Civil War and their ancestors who fought in it. So I wonder if that's similar in England at all. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. I think it's time to learn about English civil wars.
The English Civil Wars, 1642 to 1651, were
1642 to 1651. I mean, we're talking nearly 400 years ago. That's a major difference as well already between England and America when I'm comparing and contrasting them, because it's kind of the only thing I know about. I know some history, and it's American history, so go figure. America's history is not nearly as long as British, United Kingdom, English history. So that's already a major difference.
The English Civil Wars, 1642 to 1651, were a sequence of destructive battles that took place in the middle of the 17th century.
So it was about 10 years of civil war, my God.
At the heart of the upheaval was a titanic power struggle between King Charles I and Parliament, with battle lines drawn across deep and intricate political, religious, and economic divisions.
Really? So, if I'm understanding this correctly, this is a war between a king, as in a monarch, and parliament, which would have been sort of elected representatives? Interesting.
The English Civil Wars were the best known among the conflicts of the larger War of Three Kingdoms.
Jeez, what are all these names? The War of Three Kingdoms? That makes it sound epic. Like, that's badass. That's like Game of Thrones stuff. The War of Three Kingdoms, if that's actually its name. I'm sure, war is horrible. Don't get me wrong. And I can chuckle at it now, in hindsight, now that it's all over. But I know for those that had to experience it, it's horrific. So, with that being said, I just want to preface that I know that.
England, Scotland, and Ireland. Path.
What about Wales? Hey! What about Wales? What the heck? I got you guys. The Welsh? I got you. Why aren't they acknowledging you?
War of Three Kingdoms. England, Scotland, and Ireland.
Huh.
Path to war. After King James' death in 1625, his son Charles I ascended to the throne as king of three separate kingdoms, England, Scotland, and Ireland. Within 4 years after Charles' crowning, numerous unpopular measures, most notably the ship money tax, had brought the long-standing religious, political, and social disputes in the British Isles into a climax.
Man, taxes, man. Why is every war that I know of, every freaking war I know of, is started by taxes? Pretty sure the the Revolutionary War, where America fought for independence from Great Britain, was over taxes, tea and all that.
In 1629, Charles began what was known as the Personal Rule, or by his enemies, the 11-Year Tyranny, during which he dismissed all his members of Parliament and ruled England without a Parliament for the next 11 years.
Wait, that's kind of bad. Wait, wait. Maybe it is this king's fault. I was going to say, one thing I was going to admit is I have no freaking clue whose fault things are yet. Now, I don't know if this video is going to explain that. I don't know if you can really pinpoint a fault. But if you're going to go become king and rule with an iron fist, especially 400 years ago when your fist was probably extra iron, and banish your parliament, they're going to be pissed, right? Understandably so.
From the late 1630s, Charles attempted to develop a more English-style religious practice in Scotland, drawing severe opposition from the Scottish Presbyterians, a branch of Protestantism in the kingdom.
So he already banishes his parliament so that he can just be the one true king. The one true king. Like Simba in The Lion King. Then just goes on up to Scotland is like, hey, I'm gonna redo your religion. You're gonna follow mine now. Yours isn't cool. Like, is he trying to piss everyone off? Is that his goal?
Aiming to bring the rebellious Scots to heel, in 1639, an army led by Charles I arrived in Scotland and fought the First Bishops' War, but was quickly overwhelmed by the experienced Scottish army.
Hold up. The name of this video is English Civil Wars. But already we're having war between 3 different nations here. Scotland, England, and I assume Ireland. So, shouldn't this be like the United Kingdom and the Kingdom of Ireland Civil Wars or something? It's not really... Or are we going to get to the English Civil Wars? Because Civil War means fighting within yourself, obviously. So, I'm a little confused on that. Because right now we're talking about Scotland versus England. That's like kind of just a normal war.
Forcing the king to sign a peace treaty at Berwick. The king, however, refused to concede the Scots' victory and recalled a special session of Parliament to finance another war.
Oh my god, this guy, he can't even take the L. He can't even get beaten. Immediately calls for like, no, we're going again. I don't care how many of you die.
Parliament assembled in April 1640, but was dismissed after only 3 weeks, and hence became known as the Short Parliament.
Yeah.
Without the money to fight, the king's army was defeated disastrously in the Second Bishops' War in the summer of 1640.
He tried again? He went ahead and did it? Parliament said no, and we're not funding this. He banished the Parliament, and then still tried to go to war against Scotland again, after getting beaten, and then was beaten again. Okay, okay.
And the Scots successfully occupied northern England.
Oh, he didn't just get beaten, he got beaten so badly that Scots came into England. This is already 100 times more complicated than the American Civil War. Let me tell you that. By God. I mean, we have 3 nations, we have multiple nations going at war here. So by the very definition of what the war, the very context of this war, it's going to be much more complicated. But I thought our American Civil War was kind of interesting,
Demoralized and humiliated, the king had no choice but to negotiate and recall a new parliament, which became the Long Parliament, to settle the conflict.
Okay.
In October...
Is this just the worst king ever? He gets beaten, banishes Parliament, gets beaten, calls Parliament, is like, guys, I'm sorry, can you come back? Please, you can be the Long Parliament now.
Over 1641, during the political instability in London, the Catholic majority in Ireland revolted, massacring hundreds of Protestants.
Wow.
The violence heightened tension in England as Charles and Parliament did not see eye to eye on how to settle the rebellion.
What did the people of England think about this king during this rule? Did they think he just sucks? Because the way this video is presenting him makes him sound bad. He just loses a lot, he doesn't want to work with anybody, and gets invaded by Scotland a lot. Maybe an oversimplification. So I'm just wondering if the people of England at this point are like, boo, you suck. You suck, sir. Get out of here.
With continuous disagreement on military command, constitutional aspects, and especially religion, Parliament presented a list of grievances against the king known as the Grand Remonstrance to Charles in December 1641.
There's so many grievances against Charles that as a name, the list of grievances has a dang name because there's so many, and I totally understand why.
In response to this, in early 1642, the king tried but failed to arrest his leading opponents in Parliament, with Parliament taking control of the London militias and the Tower of London, and fearing for his safety, Charles escaped London for northern England.
What? Hold on. Isn't he the one who called Parliament back into order to help him because he was sucking it up so much around the place? He called Parliament back. Then they gave him the grievances, I guess, and because he can't take any criticism ever, what did he do to them?
His leading opponents in Parliament. In early 1642, the king tried but failed to arrest his leading opponents in Parliament.
They tried to criticize him a little bit, a little constructive criticism, just like thousands of complaints. And then he tries to have them arrested for that, of course. And it fails, and he has to run away. I'm not really familiar with King Charles, but I don't think I'm going to forget him now. Because, oh my goodness, is he known for this? Is he, well known in English history for, really not doing a great job, to put it nicely?
With Parliament taking control of the London militias and the Tower of London, and fearing for his safety, Charles escaped London for northern England, and urged his allies to prepare for war.
Go!
Minor fighting between the king and the Parliament began in midsummer, as each side started to compete for its own power.
I mean, wow. I'm surprised that King Charles had enough followers at this point. There must be some side to this story I'm missing. For some reason, he still has enough followers and supporters to constitute an army that's fighting against the Parliament and their army. Or maybe the Parliament is just a bunch of badasses who suited up and just the parliamentarians themselves got on horseback and rode into battle. I doubt it, though. Although, that would really be fighting for what you believe in, I guess.
On the 22nd of August, 1642, King Charles I raised his royal standard at Nottingham, officially marking the onset of the First Civil War.
Wait, now it's the a lot has happened for it not to technically be Civil War yet. So now, finally, it's Civil War. Okay.
The First Civil War, 1642 to 1646.
What do you call all that stuff that just happened with Scotland and Parliament fighting King Charles? What do you call all that if not a civil war? Goodness, that's the Zero War. If this is the first Civil War, that was the Zero War. I'm coining it now.
The First Civil War was fought between the Royalists, or the Cavaliers, the King supporters, and the Parliamentarians, or the Roundheads, commanded by Robert de Vereux.
Roundheads? Is it because of their little cartoon helmets? They are round. Probably deflects bullets and whatnot. Roundheads. Cool. And the other guys are called what?
King supporters, and the Civil War was fought between the Royalists, or the Cavaliers,
Cavaliers.
the King supporters, and the Parliamentarians, or the Roundheads.
Roundheads. Parliamentarians makes sense, because they were fighting for Parliament.
Commanded by Robert de Vereux, the 3rd Earl of Essex. The first major battle of the war happened at Edge Hill, southern Warwickshire, England, in October 1642.
Wow, that's like the dead center of England. Is that a coincidence, or does it make sense that the first pivotal battle of the war, it just happens to be at this Edge Hill, which is dead center in England?
The battle was inconclusive, and the King's army then marched on London, but was stopped at Turnham Green by Essex's expanded force.
Wow, so they immediately tried to march on the capital? Would that have technically won the Civil War? If the King's men, I already forget their name, the Vandaliers, the Ravaliers, the what?
Or the between the Royalists or the Cavaliers.
The Cavaliers. Cavaliers, like the basketball team. The American basketball team was named after a bunch of King Charles supporters in the First English World War. Who knew? Something tells me that's probably not the same Cavaliers.
By Essex's expanded force. King's army then marched on London, but was stopped at Turnham Green by Essex's expanded force.
Okay.
Small-scale fighting occurred later that year, during which the king established his headquarters at Oxford. Fighting was widespread mainly by smaller forces in regional areas, resulting in royalists holding all of northern England and parliamentarians controlling the southeast.
This is what I'm talking about. Whereas to this day in America, you still have, people will still talk about the North and the South, the Union and the Confederacy, the two sides of the American Civil War. Do English people still, it's not like people bring it up as a bad thing in a negative way, although sometimes they do. Especially in the, I think the thing that a lot of people have problem with is in the south of America, there's a lot of pride in being like descendants of the Confederacy, which, yeah, there's a whole bunch of political mumbo-jumbo that goes with that. So I'm curious if that exists in England with this sort of northern and southern divide.
Including London. After gaining victory in the Battle of Adwalton Moor, the king held 2/3 of England and Wales, and appeared to be gaining the...
Oh, so Wales does exist now. Suddenly when it's convenient to the story. Okay.
upper hand with the Irish troops joining the Royalists.
Wait. A lot just happened. Hold up.
After gaining victory in the Battle of Adwalton Moor, the king held 2/3 of England and Wales, and appeared to be gaining the upper hand with the Irish troops joining the Royalists.
Ah, well that'll do it, huh? You're already kind of gaining the upper hand, and then you have more Irish support. I wonder why that was. That's probably a detail that I'm not going to get in this video, but certainly interesting.
However, in January 1644, a significant alliance between the parliamentarians and Scotland, which resulted in a strong Scottish force, entered the fight.
Oh, look, it's like a two-pronged attack. If the Scottish are getting involved and allying with the parliamentarians, the Scottish are like up here to the north. And it's just like video game strats. You know, these first-person shooters are paying off. The two-pronged attack. We got a northern flank and a southern flank. I wonder if that actually was a thing, in all seriousness.
With the help of the Scots, the parliamentarians won a decisive victory 6 months later at Marston Moor, west.
Wow, I just realized the Irish supported the Royalists, if I'm remembering correctly, the Cavaliers, and the Scots are siding with the parliamentarians, or Roundheads. Oh, it's a lot, but, you know, this is actually a really interesting story. So I'm remembering this story, like, a little better than some of American history already, just because it's, like, actually kind of interesting.
Of York, leading to the collapse of the Royalist cause in the north. This decisive victory also paved the way for the reform of the parliamentary armies, with the creation of the new model army under the command of Sir Thomas Fairfax, the third.
I feel like I've heard the name Thomas Fairfax. I have no idea where I've heard that name, or that it had anything to do with English history. But I feel like I've heard it before.
With the creation of the new model army under the command of Sir Thomas Fairfax, the third Lord Fairfax of Cameron, and Oliver Cromwell, the
Oliver Cromwell! I feel like I've heard that too. What the heck?
Commander-in-Chief. The new model army moved against the Royalist forces and scored a decisive victory at the Battle of Naseby, effectively destroying the Royalist forces. Charles I was handed over to the parliamentarians, marking the end of the First Civil War.
Wow. What happened to Charles I? I'm kind of curious. Was he, like, still king? Was he executed? He did cause a civil war. Ooh.
The Second Civil War.
No, wait. What happened to him? Oh, I kind of want to check. Is he a part of the Second Civil War? I gotta be patient and see if Charles was part of the Second Civil War. because I don't want to get spoiled. Like, this is a movie. I get to enjoy, history hundreds of years ago as if it were some kind of, like, TV show,
1648. Despite
Okay.
defeat in the war, Charles refused to surrender and sought to exploit his opponent's religious and political differences.
Wow. They brought back Charles for season 2. They brought him back. Wow, he must have been a fan favorite or something, right? Okay, I'll stop.
In December 1647, from the Isle of Wight, where he was being held prisoner at Carisbrooke Castle, Charles concluded a peace treaty with some leading Scots, in which they promised to join forces with the English royalists and restore the king's power.
Hold up. He's in a prison? He's in a prison writing peace treaties, somehow communicating with Scots, organizing armies. How is this possible? Am I understanding correctly?
At Carisbrooke Castle, 1647, from the Isle of Wight, where he was being held prisoner at Carisbrooke Castle, Charles concluded a peace treaty with some leading Scots, in which they promised to join forces with the English royalists.
Roundheads, what were you doing? Who was in charge of watching this guy? Come on, he's in his cell with a big feather and quill and parchment, writing out peace treaties, getting Scots to come sign it and stuff. What are you doing? Keep an eye on his jail cell, for crying out loud. Okay, I'm sure there's a very reasonable explanation to this. There has to be.
And restore the king's power in return for religious settlement in England.
Okay.
Shortly afterward, a series of armed uprisings began in the spring and summer of 1648 in favor of the king, marking the bloody and merciless fighting of the Second Civil War.
He freaking started a second civil war from his prison? That's honestly impressive. I mean, I don't want to give him too much credit because he's causing a lot of death and destruction. But my God, somehow he is organizing wars from his bed. So
in South Wales, Cromwell and the New Model Army quickly crushed a revolt of former parliamentarians at St. Fagans in early May.
The only thing that would explain this, now that I think about it, is Charles must have had commanding officers or other historical figures that took charge of his armies, military, and organization of the movement while he was in prison. He must have had really good, second in command people ready to go to keep a war going after your leader has been put in prison, right? That would explain it, I think.
Followed by the siege of Pembroke later that month. At the same time, Fairfax and his troops beat the Kentish royalists at Maidstone. Smaller uprisings occurred in Cornwall, North Wales, Northamptonshire, Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, and Surrey.
Also, now that I see it like this with all these smaller uprisings in the Second Civil War, maybe it's more of maybe a lot of the people in England just sided with Charles and the Royalists. Maybe it's as simple as that. And it was like a grassroots uprising with all these conflicts because they didn't need to be. It didn't matter that Charles was imprisoned. The movement was still alive and well, just because of the support behind it, maybe?
Though all were quickly put down by Parliament.
Oh, okay.
And at long last, the Battle of Preston in August ended with the decisive defeat and surrender of the Scots. Charles was found guilty of high treason and was...
The Battle of Preston, so I guess that's a really historical... I mean, it's the end of the Second Civil War, I guess, yeah.
Defeat and surrender of the Scots. Charles was found guilty of high treason and was executed by beheading in Whitehall, London.
I was gonna say, execute this guy. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't want to sound cold and callous, but if it's the leader of the enemy that's been giving you trouble for 10, 18 years now, just chop his head off and be done with it. I'm sorry. It has to be done.
On the 30th of January, 1649.
Okay.
The Second Civil War came to an end.
Okay.
The Third Civil War, 1649 to 1651.
Why?
Following Charles' death, a Republican government was created in England supported by the New Model Army's military might. Cromwell's army launched a victorious reconquest of Ireland, beginning late in 1649.
Ireland being made up of the supporters of Charles, if I remember correctly. So it needs to be reconquered by the parliamentarians, I think.
Including the infamous massacre of thousands of Irish and Royalist troops and citizens at Drogheda.
Oh.
Meanwhile, in 1650, the
Yikes.
Scots signed the Treaty of Breda with the executed king's eldest son, King Charles II of Scotland, who was crowned in early 1651. Charles II
Okay.
had gathered an army of English and Scottish royalists even before he was legally anointed, compelling Cromwell to invade Scotland.
Okay, so you defeat one King Charles, and lo and behold, you're immediately met with another. Do they just never learn? Actually, I have no idea. Maybe they won. I have no idea how this story ends. I mean, the way this story is being told makes me think that the parliamentarians win this whole thing, and modern England arises from that, essentially. But what if Charles II and the Scots win? That'd be I don't know. I wonder which way the showrunners took this one.
After being beaten at Dunbar in September 1650 and at Inverkeithing in July 1651 by Cromwell's forces, Charles II led an army driving south to invade England, but only to be defeated by a massive parliamentarian army at Worcester.
Oh, so I thought he was doing something for a second. I thought he was onto something when they showed his little icon running all the way through England like that, and he immediately met a giant parliamentarian army and was mercilessly killed? Wait, am I just imagining that? Is that just what I want, or is that what he said?
England, but only to be defeated by a massive parliamentarian army at Worcester.
Defeated. So we don't know what happened to Charles II yet.
Although the young king narrowly averted captivity, the overwhelming victory of Cromwell and the Parliament brought the Third English Civil War, as well as the broader War of the Three Kingdoms, to an end.
Thank goodness. My God. Wow. And I understand why it's called the War of Three Kingdoms now, because Ireland and Scotland played pivotal roles in choosing sides of the different sides of the English, conflict. So that actually makes a lot of sense.
The impact of the wars.
Yeah. Probably pretty impactful.
The English Civil Wars were long and deadly battles that shattered society at all levels, dividing families, villages, cities, and counties across the kingdom.
Right. I mean, that's exactly how you would describe the American Civil War. I mean, it's horrible. You're fighting your own people. It's horrible. So, yeah, divides a lot of people.
The conflict resulted in massive amounts of injury, death, psychological suffering, pillage, and destruction in many parts of England.
Yeah.
Up to 200,000 civilians and soldiers, accounting for 4.5% of the population, died as a result of warfare and diseases carried by marching forces.
4.5%? 200,000? That's 1 out of 20 people. Think about you. Everyone probably knows about 20 people, One of them just died. If you lived through the English Civil War. Wars, plural. But 1 out of 20 people in the entire kingdom died. What?
Up to 200,000 civilians and soldiers, accounting for 4.5% of the population, died as a result of warfare and diseases carried by marching forces.
Jeez.
That loss was proportionally as great as that of the First World War.
Right. It's that is a outrageously big number. That's horrible.
In 1914. Thanks for watching.
I think that's the end. That's the end of the wars, thank God. Past to future. That was a really good video. I liked that. Thank you. Wow. That did not disappoint. It did not disappoint at all. I don't want to sound like, I don't know how I feel about phrasing this kind of stuff. That was very entertaining. While still we're talking about horrible, terrible casualties and death and war. But when I am forced to draw the comparison to America and these English civil wars, this was much more complicated. This was much more interesting. Far more than I even thought. I didn't even know England had a civil war, till I started this video, let alone three civil wars, which spanned decades. That had to leave a long-lasting impression on England, right? Even though the American Civil War, I mean, when did that happen? American Civil War. When were you? Exactly. Okay, so 150 years ago. Not that long ago. Whereas the English Civil Wars were basically 400 years ago, so a lot more time has passed. So I wonder if English people still think about this kind of thing. I'm sure they learn about it and, learn from history, learn about it, respect the story. But in America, people actually really think about family ties and relations and geography in respect to the American Civil War, which is real interesting. And I kind of wonder what Brits and those of you in the UK actually think about these civil wars, because it might be completely different to how I think about American Civil War. It's very interesting to look at it in that kind of hindsight, while also, having learned the actual details of this story. Pretty interesting. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this reaction, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more reactions like this, me reacting to the UK, culture, history, new stuff, things I never knew, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.